This is a monologue about a monologue. Last year was the first year of the Sinai Story Project. I decided to push myself out of my comfort zone and write a monologue about my experience navigating medical school as an abuse survivor. I thought it would be cathartic to anonymously put my story out there and have it performed in front of a large crowd of my peers and professors, and ultimately it was. But little did I know how controversial it would be. Here's something you didn't know if you attended the Story Project last year. My monologue was actually censored. Shocking, right? Let me explain. In my monologue, I wrote about an incident where I was made to feel uncomfortable by a professor. I didn't name him, and I didn't accuse him of doing anything illegal. I merely wrote about his teaching style and things that he did and said in front of the entire class. Things that he did out in the open on a daily basis. And then I said that his intimidating teaching style triggered bad memories of my past abuse. Let me make this clear. I never said that this professor ever physically abused me. I said his intimidating teaching style triggered bad memories of my past abuse. I think I should be able to say something like that about my own thoughts inside my own head. Apparently, this was too much for that professor to hear, and when he caught wind of my monologue, he forced the Story Project producers to cut those sentences threatening legal action. The producers' hands were tied, so those sentences were deleted. It's ironic, isn't it? And so I attended the performance of the Sinai Story Project, so excited and nervous to hear my monologue performed, and my heart sank when I realized that part of my story had been removed through what turned out to be intimidation tactics. Here is an abuse survivor, someone who was always silenced, trying to stand up on her own 2 feet, trying to use her voice to tell her painful story in public for the first time. And what happened? Someone reached down her throat and took her voice away from her. You know what this incident reminds me of? Ironically enough, this silencing reminds me of something that happened to me when I was being abused back in college. There I was with my ex in his dorm room. He was making me feel bad, and I was crying. And then he said, "Stop crying so loudly, my roommates will hear you. Stop crying so loudly, my roommates will hear you. Stop crying so loudly, my roommates will hear you." Sound familiar? Sounds like the same sentiment a professor might use in response to a student trying to be critical of them. I'd like to point out that what I wrote in my original monologue really wasn't that bad. I only wrote about this professor's teaching style and things that he did in front of the entire class. Things that he did on a daily basis. I was just pointing it out. He's already doing it in front of everybody anyways. Why would he try to hide that? In response to the critique that, yes, my story is valid, but a public forum like the Story Project wasn't the best place to voice my concerns, I say, you can't have it both ways. You can't treat your students a certain way in public and not allow them to talk about it on a public stage. Eventually, someone is going to say something and take a stand. I'd also like to point out that you're really underestimating your students if you think that you can silence them like this so easily. We are smart and driven people that had to jump through a lot of hoops to get through these doors. We're not really the kind of people that will go quietly. I learned a lot from my past abusive relationship. I learned the courage to leave my ex. I learned the courage to speak up. I learned that I deserve to not be abused, but more than that, I deserve to be respected. And now I don't tolerate disrespect. I refuse to be punished for speaking my mind. You cannot take my voice, my memories, and my opinions away from me. You cannot gaslight me into believing that I was wrong for trying to speak up in the first place, because here's the ugly truth. The feeling of being abused is omnipresent in medical school. Maybe it's for the greater good of the patients, but don't try to hide from the truth. Any one of your students could have written what I wrote. I know for a fact I am not alone in my feelings. As a side note, I think it's interesting to see the Sinai PR machine at work. There are always photographers around. You plaster your students' faces all over Instagram, subway ads, giant posters, TV screens. But at the same time, you're not really listening to what we have to say. Let me tell you, for an institution that seems very image-focused, this whole incident really isn't the best look. And we live in an information age where you can't use old-school intimidation tactics to keep people quiet anymore. Despite the power you hold over my grades and my career, you're really not in charge of my narrative. I am. So maybe it's a good idea to listen to your students' criticism rather than to deny their lived experiences. I think the students deserve to know what happened and that the administration shouldn't be able to get away with something like this. The Story Project was created to give voice to the voiceless, to give students a platform to talk about the things that they're scared to say out loud. You can't censor that. That defeats the whole purpose. Allowing students to speak up about their bad experiences at Sinai will only make things better, trust me. Silencing them will only make things worse. In the end, I don't know how much of this monologue will make it to the audience's ears, if at all. But I hope that my story reaches you. There were many times when I almost gave up on writing this second monologue. It's very demoralizing to feel like your school's administration is trying to stop you from speaking up. But I hope that I can inspire everyone else to speak their minds and make positive change at this school. One of those changes should be putting the concept of consent at the center of our medical education. I think that would vastly decrease incidents like this from happening again in the future. Like I said last year, students should not feel trapped. And I hope to never again hear something along the lines of "stop crying so loudly, my roommates will hear you." But even if I do, that sentiment doesn't scare me anymore because now that phrase is my fuel to fight harder. We don't live in a time where we can afford to cry quietly anymore. So I will cry loudly. I don't care if your roommates can hear me. Let them hear what you are doing to me.